How did you find that program and the application process? You said it took a while to hear back. Like, what were the qualifications that you had to have to do that? Because I know there might be people listening that are thinking like, it would be really nice to get a job abroad, but they've never done that before and they don't even know how to get the process started. So what did you have to qualify to do to get the position, and how did you find out about it?
Okay, great question. I found out about the program from another teacher. So it's called the Cultural Ambassador Program, North American Language and Cultural Assistance in Spain. But it's a government program, and they solicit people not only from the U.S., anywhere that English is a main language. So the U.S., Canada, and the U.K. So they solicit people from those areas to go over. And it's a very easy job. The title is like language assistant. You go to a school 2-3 days a week, 3 hours a day, and you go home and then you can explore and learn. So it's very, very easy to do.
So were there any qualifications that you needed? Like, what was the application process like? Did you have to test to a certain level of Spanish proficiency, or were they just concerned with your English ability?
English ability. Mostly that you had a degree from somewhere, that you were a native speaker. Honestly, most of the things just involved a lot of paperwork, government paperwork. You know, of course, getting your visa, getting your passport, things of that nature. That was the holdup, but no major exam, nothing of that nature. And I don't even remember your Spanish fluency mattering, because when I got over there, I met people who didn't speak Spanish in the program. You know, they weren't Spanish speakers, so they just did it for the thrill, you know, to enjoy and live life. So I don't remember your level of Spanish being a big deal either.
Wow. Okay. So that's interesting, because I think a lot of people, you know, probably think if they haven't worked abroad before that you have to like study and pass some type of language proficiency exam just to get a job abroad. But, you know, as you mentioned, like English is a pretty in-demand language. So if you're a native English speaker, you can really use that to travel to many places, because a lot of people want to learn English, and they're, you know, really have a lot of active programs to teach English. So just having that skill is something that you can use, and as a side benefit, use that to sort of help you get exposure to Spanish in a Spanish-speaking country. And then, so after those days that you were working at the school, did you then take that time to take classes on your own in Spanish, or did you just sort of have immersion with the culture while you were there?
Cultural immersion, definitely, because even though I had gotten a degree in the language and done an internship, you know, it's nothing like being in the language, surrounded by it, and you cannot escape. The immersion factor is how I grew in the language.
So you were spending this time in Spain, so you had 9 months there. You were working a few days a week as a language assistant, and you had this sort of, like you mentioned, like total immersion where you couldn't really escape because you had to sort of conduct your life in Spain for those 9 months. So during that time, was there a moment that you had similar to your aha moment when you realized you wanted to go live abroad? Did you ever have a moment where you felt like, wow, I'm actually bilingual now? I'm not just sort of, you know, learning Spanish or trying to speak Spanish, but I actually speak Spanish fairly well and fairly fluidly. Did you have a moment or a point in time where you realized that you had reached that point, or was it just something that gradually happened over time where you started to just improve with the language?
It gradually happened over time. For me, I was just living daily life and trying to survive. I wasn't thinking of the beauty of how I blossomed. So it just happened over time. But I did realize the beauty of how I had blossomed once I returned to the U.S. That's when it hit, like, oh, I really am doing well. When I would meet Spanish speakers and have a full conversation, not just the basics, right? Or when I applied for a bilingual job and was able to have a conversation with who they put me on the phone with to see how well I could speak. That's when it hit me, like, oh, I'm good. I'm good at this. Once I returned to the U.S.
Oh, that's interesting, because I would think that while you're there, you know, kind of exposed to it every day, that you would be more aware. But like you said, right, you're because you're totally immersed in the culture, you're just living your life day to day. You're not thinking about, you know, you're like, well, I need to get food right now. Like, how do I do that? You're not thinking about like, oh, can I conjugate an AR verb like in the predicate, right? You're like, so it's a different mindset. Okay, so you said that when you came back to the U.S., that's when you really realized it. So when you came back, what did you do with your Spanish? Because I know a lot of times people fear that if you live abroad or you travel abroad, you can be really proficient with the language while you're there. But then when you come back home, you might lose some of that proficiency because you don't have as much practice with the language, and you're no longer in that like survival mode where you need to use Spanish in day-to-day life. So how were you able to maintain that when you came back? And did you notice any difference in your speaking ability as you were no longer living in that environment?
Well, the expression, if you don't use it, you lose it, is true in this case. So I knew coming back, I had to have a job that made me use the language. And that's why I specifically sought out bilingual positions. And I ended up working as a bilingual secretary for a children's hospital for 2 years. So that helped me keep the language. Also, during that same time, I volunteered as an interpreter at a free clinic, a student clinic, really, where the students were learning and how to be pharmacists, doctors, and things of that nature. So they also allowed the interpreters to be volunteers so we could grow in our language ability. So those two experiences sustained me in continuing the language. And after that, I was a high school Spanish teacher. I most recently worked as the health program coordinator for our local Mexican Consulate and Immigrant Resource Center, El Zócalo. So having jobs that made me use the language is what kept it up for me.
Now, that's a great strategy. I think that, people don't always think of it that way, especially if they're not learning the language for a job, right? To get a job, it might not be at the top of someone's mind that they could actually seek out these positions. And that's not only a way to find job opportunities, but also a way to maintain your language ability, because you have to use it in a real life setting. It's not like you're forcing yourself to, I need to make a friend that speaks Spanish, or I need to go find a language exchange partner so I can get my practice time in, but like it's just a part of your life. So I think that's a brilliant strategy. And I think people usually think about it in reverse instead of thinking this is a way to make sure I stay immersed in the language. So that's really interesting that you were able to make that connection and to keep your language skills up, even though you're back living in basically an English speaking environment. So then from there, tell me what made you start your business? Because I know you also teach Spanish and you have clients that you're actually teaching Spanish to. So as a non-native speaker of Spanish, how did you get over sort of this idea that, I think there's a bias in the language learning community that, you have to talk to native speakers. Like native speakers, you must, only speak to them. So how did you kind of overcome that bias towards, having a native Spanish speaker as a teacher and starting your own business and actually teaching Spanish to others?
Okay. So that's full of a lot of goodies. Let me try to unpack it. Number one, the concern people may have of not talking to a native speaker. One thing I learned in my study, native Spanish is varied. A person who's in Puerto Rico is going to talk a lot different from somebody who's from Bolivia, right? La República Dominicana, Buenos Aires, etc., right? So there's a lot of variety even in native Spanish. And so I within myself, I understood that early. And so with others, I try to mention that as well. Like maybe you're looking for this one certain thing, but Spanish is so varied. And on top of it being different by region, even within the region, it's different based on your social class, your economic class. How close are you to the indigenous community in